but hopefully it's told through my story. So there is a lot of law interwoven into it. When Doug and I first started talking about what this was gonna be about, we did come up with the movie A Few Good Men, and then we had a moment where we were like, that movie's 30 years old, So hopefully, the title is A Few Good Men. Could you imagine Hollywood putting out a title like that in this day and age? Kind of aged us, but fortunately, I think I'm safe today. So, mandatory disclaimer here. These are my own thoughts. I am in uniform, but these are Jim Howland's thoughts. These are my ideas, and I reserve the right to correct myself later if any fact checkers want to come in and say what really happened. Okay, so yes, most of you know the Navy through and the JAG Corps through A Few Good Men. Tom Cruise famously said he wanted the Fogo de Chao, and Jack Nicholson said you can't handle the Fogo de Chao, which is fairly accurate. I usually come here, eat a lot of bread, and need a nap on my Friday afternoons, so fairly accurate statement as far as I'm concerned. Also a very accurate quote from the movie. I think we would all agree with that.
Yes.
Okay, but that's not the only time that the JAG Corps gotten some love from Hollywood. There was a show called Jag. On that show, the main actor was a pilot in the morning, and then he would show up to court in the afternoon. Very, very, very accurate depiction of the day in the life of a military lawyer.
You mean facetious?
minus flying jets. And then some of you guys have seen NCIS in that show. That show, as a prosecutor, that show ruins everything because there's like these fancy basements where they solve all these super complex crimes. But if you want a tour of the NCIS building in Mayport, you will not be seeing the fancy basement where they solve all these crimes. It's a lot of cubicles and government-looking buildings. But we always make sure that our juries understand. Like, if you've seen that show, you will know that it's not like the real world. Okay, so I don't want to get too deep into the history, but just a couple milestones. In 1775, according to the Army, they established their JAG Corps. I don't know if that's true. The Army is different than the Navy, but they claim to be the nation's oldest law firm. So, good for them. Don't know if that's true. The Army, like I said, they claim a lot of things that the Navy would dispute. In World War II, just as a little bit of context, in World War II, officers, there were non-lawyers representing sailors and military members in military tribunals. And all of the different branches were operating under their own set of rules. So there was no consistency across the services. And so in 1950, they established what's called the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Uniform being, these are going to be the same rules, Army, Navy, in times of war, Coast Guard, now the Air Force and the Marine Corps. And now the JAGs are lawyers. So you get legal representation with a bar license behind it. A lot of things probably happened in between 1950 and 2008, but I'm just going to gloss over those. In 2008, Congress made the highest ranking member of the JAG Corps a 3-star for each service. Each service has their own JAG. This was in the aftermath of Abu Ghraib. So a consistent theme you'll see is we go to war, and then about a decade later, Congress wants to change the way we practice law in the military. So there was a thought at the time of the Abu Ghraib incident that ethics advisors and lawyers did not have enough credibility. They did not have a seat at the table with some of the highest ranking members of the military, so they changed that. In 2013, victims of crimes were assigned attorneys. So if you made an allegation of sexual assault, domestic violence, you were assigned a victim's legal counsel. And the thought behind that was that especially women in the military were making allegations of sexual harassment, sexual assault, and they believed they were being reprised against by their chain of command. And so that was sort of Congress's initiative to prevent that from happening. And so now there's a lot, so if there's a courtroom and there's a trial, there's a lot of lawyers in there representing a lot of different interests. And then in 2023, Congress just made a lot of changes to the way that the military prosecutes certain crimes. I'm not going to get too far into that yet, but I will talk about that in a second. My path into the Navy JAG Corps is the same path of about 90% of our Corps, which is the student program. The Navy recruits law students out of law school. There's me, and I think that's 2011. I was recruited out of law school, and I signed up into the Navy Reserves, and I finished my law school. It was pretty cool to just sort of coast through law school. My last few, we had twins, so having to worry about where I was going to work was not on the list of things to do, which was nice. So you finish law school, you graduate, you pass the bar, and then you go to Officer Development School. Officer Development School, so people in the military, you know, those on the outside picture like military training, like climbing walls, you know, carrying logs into the ocean. Like, that is not what I did. I went with dentists, doctors, nurses, lawyers, and we basically just learned how to put the uniform on and salute without embarrassing ourselves. And I still don't do it great, but you know, I got pretty much the hang of it. Okay, there's other paths. There's other paths into the JAG Corps. There's a direct appointment program. So we will recruit, the Navy will recruit people that are practicing law directly into the Navy. That's about 10% of our Corps, and then there's other programs for people that are in the Navy that just want to become lawyers in the Navy. We'll send you to law school. It's a pretty good gig. You can get it. You're getting paid your full salary, full military benefits while going to law school, and then you just owe them like your life on the back. But you know, and this one hits home for my wife because that's what I promised her and that's what I gave her. But it's a pretty good life. It really is. Okay, so we practice three main areas of law. The first is called legal assistance. So we will provide sort of frontline legal assistance to sailors. We are not as good as you all are. So when I say family law, what I mean is like very basic triage. As you can imagine, the military is very hard on families. And it incentivizes marriage at a very young age, and some very awful situations can come from that. If you're 20 years old and you're living in a barracks room and you're told that if you get married, you can move off base and you can get paid more, a lot of them will take you up on that. So family law is a lot of, you know, and deployments are hard on families. You're gone, things happen, people move on without you. It's one of the sadder parts of the military. It's really hard on kids, it's really hard on spouses. Some people aren't cut out for it. So when I say family law, that's just basically me saying what best interest of the child is, equitable distribution of assets. But I don't have anywhere, I'm not like we will not march into the Duval County court system and represent a sailor for their divorce. What we'll typically do is we'll say, you got to talk to a lawyer out in town. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to get connected with the local bar, was because the bar association, was because it's nice to have names. You know, it's nice to, if I've got a sailor with an immigration law problem, it's nice to have somebody that practices that I can say, hey, you should probably talk to this person. I can't formally endorse, but here's the name and here's the number. Basic estate planning, and I say basic because I can write a will, but most of the time what I do is, like, you know, most of our sailors are single, no kids, and they have an Xbox to their name, right? So a lot of that is like, to you, bro, you don't even need a will, right? Like, all of this is going to go to your parents. Another thing, but you know, we will write a will. There's software, we are trained how to write a will, which is kind of neat, coming straight out of law school. And you know, hypotheticals like, you're a sailor, you start dating some stripper named Cinnamon, and you put Cinnamon on your life insurance plan, right? And then, we'll do pre-deployment briefs. Fast forward 10 years, you've married somebody, you've got 5 kids with this woman, and what I'll tell them is, hey, check your life insurance, because if it still says a stripper named Cinnamon, then a stripper named Cinnamon is going to get $500,000 from you, not your wife and kids. So other things we do, powers of attorney. Everybody wants a general power of attorney. It's not a good idea, but we'll do it if they want it. Landlord-tenant law, that's another big thing. So I will not march into court with you, but I will write a very strongly worded letter to your landlord that says, please give him his security deposit back. And oftentimes they do. A lot of people, especially, but it's funny because in like Jacksonville and so if you go to Texas, it's like, thank you for your service. But like military towns, they know better. You get a little bit more resistance. Or like, hey, I got it, but he ruined the house. So like, we appreciate his service, but we just want our carpets fixed. So you see a little bit more resistance in military towns like Norfolk, Jacksonville, and then Service Members Civil Relief Act. So that's a law that protects. It effectively protects people when they're deploying. So if you're deploying or you're being ordered out of the state, you can get out of your lease. Basically, no questions asked. And actually, Florida has a more stringent military member protection law than the federal government. So I have Kanye West on here just because, like I said, it's very basic, and a lot of things that I say are kind of echoing the brilliance of some of the things that Kanye West said in his song Gold Digger. I'll have sailors come in and they'll say like, oh, I know all that child support is just going to, fund her personally. And I'm like, oh, you mean like when Kanye West said she was supposed to buy Tyco with your money, and she went out and got LiPo with your money. So there's a very basic level of guidance that we give. Another thing we do, national security law. So we take ships and we go to sea, and there's a lot that comes with that. Rules of engagement, talking to operators before they go on to another ship and interact with very sketchy people. Law of the sea. I love law of the sea. Like, one of the things we do is called freedom of navigation. So like, China will sometimes say like, we declare that this is like, Chinese territory, right? And like the military will be like, no, it's not, and we'll like basically just drive straight through it, just to let them know not to get comfortable there. Counter-piracy, admiralty law. So if a ship is driving too fast and too close to the, off the river, the Navy will pay the owners of those docks if they're destroyed. So there's a whole section of people that do that. Detainee treatment. I'll just anchor here for a second. So when I deployed, I learned a very valuable lesson, which I wasn't aware of at the time, but I was part of the crew and I wanted to stand watch. So there's this watch, you stand, and most of the officers stood it. You're basically on the lookout for threats. You're communicating things up to the tower, and it's a 4-hour watch. Like I said, almost everybody does this. You're a watch stander. You're contributing to the mission, and I wanted to do that. So I started basically standing this watch under instruction. You have to stand under instruction, and then you get the qualification, and you're blessed to stand this watch. I did it for a couple days, and the Commodore pulled me into his office, and he said, Jag, I love the initiative. I love that you're trying to stand this watch, but stop. And I was like, and I said, why? Why do you want me, I want to contribute. And he said, I got a bunch of officers that can do that. And if things go down, I don't want you in front of me pushing buttons. I want you behind me whispering in my ear about things that nobody else on this ship is qualified and trained to think about. And I want you to prevent me from getting fired if I accept a gift from the Prince of, Bahrain against, ethics regulations. So I learned a very valuable lesson on that deployment, which was to know your role. I am an advisor. I mean, so when we do these missions, like, I'm not a trigger puller. I'm nothing important. I am there to give advice, and they can take it, they can disregard it. But ever since that interaction, I hear a lot of organizations, they say, like, our lawyers say we can't do this, right? Well, like, that's ridiculous. I would never respect a commanding officer that says my lawyer can't let me do this. That's your call. That's the commander's call. I'm here to just give you guidance one way or another. But ultimately, you're the one that's making the decision. If you deploy, you'll realize that there's a lot of ocean out there. It's like, it's so much bigger, right? Like, you watch the Titanic and you're like, surely somebody's like coming to get them. Like, and you go out there and you're like, even in this day and age, like, nobody's coming. Like, it is so far out there. And the funny thing is, the unique thing about the military that I love is that, and we learned this during COVID, is that the bored sailors are bad sailors. When we come home and into port, and I'm sure you understand this, and that's when all the trouble happens. But when you're at sea, for the most part, everybody's got a mission. You're working around the clock. It's really important work that is being done out there. And people are, for the most part, on their best behavior. If for no other reason, they want to get off at the port. And one of the biggest carrots they dangle out there is that going out on these port visits is a privilege. It is not a right. If you act up on the ship, you're not getting off. That can trigger a lot of compliance. So, legal assistance, national security law, and then the third area is military justice. We have our own justice system. And so, as you can see over here, to the left, that is what Hollywood thinks a Navy courtroom looks like. Over here, to the right, that is the courtroom at Mayport, right down the road. Not exactly as fancy, could definitely use a little bit of that Joanna Gaines touch, but it works. And there's another one at NAS Jax, and we hold trials here for things that happen all around the world. We call them in, we call witnesses in from all around the world, have these trials typically in a week, and then everybody goes home. So it's a unique perspective. Some famous trials. So every now and then, the media will get fascinated by a case. I won't go through all of these, but I'll just note that, a lot of people don't realize Jackie Robinson went to general court-martial in the 1940s. And one of the important history lessons is that Congress and the federal government can't change society quite, directly. But what they can do is change the military. That's a consistent theme, is that long before Jim Crow laws were outlawed, it was pretty simple for the commander, for Congress and the commander-in-chief to say, we're not going to allow you to discriminate on the basis of race on military buses, which is exactly what Jackie Robinson got in trouble for. He was on a bus, and he was sitting in the middle of the bus, and he was told to go to the back of the bus. Again, this was long before this was outlawed out in town, but not a lawful order in the military. He refused to do so. He was hung up on charges for insubordination and disrespecting a superior officer who told him to go to the back of the bus. Went to trial, got found not guilty, and then 3 years later broke the color barrier. So pretty interesting. That's a consistent theme. You see it a lot. We recently saw this in the submarine community. The submarine community was very resistant to allowing women to serve on submarines. I mean, it was almost like, it's almost ridiculous now to hear some of the justifications that they were making, but it was basically like, we can't have women on submarines. It's going to ruin everything. It's like, it's not the way it is, right? And like, the president said, no, that is the way it's going to be, and you will do this. And Congress, so we can change things a lot faster in the military, I think, than we can in society. And I mean, that whole notion that women can't serve on submarines is absolutely ridiculous. And that was only it wasn't that long ago that this issue was raised. Another case that came up recently was the Eddie Gallagher case. I don't know if any of you remember that case, but he was accused of killing a detainee. So his unit was at a black site, and they were guarding over detainees. He was accused of effectively just killing, a bad guy. And the interesting issues that get raised in a lot of these major court martials are, just sort of the ethics about what kind of a military we want to be, what kind of country we want to be to the world. A lot of people thought, well, he killed a terrorist, so what's the problem? And I guess the counter to that was, well, we hold ourselves to a higher standard, so that's the problem. We don't kill detainees for no reason. He was actually acquitted. Pretty fascinating case that was prosecuted while President Trump was the commander-in-chief. He was very much on Chief Gallagher's side, so if you can imagine prosecuting a case on behalf of the state of Florida, and the governor is not on your side. It's just an interesting issue that comes up in a lot of these trials. Okay, so that is, those are the cases that CNN, MSNBC care about, but 95% of what we do has nothing to do with that, particularly in a peacetime Navy, which is where we are now. We do, most of the time I'm in court, DUI, intimate partner violence, sexual assault, 18 to 25-year-olds living in close quarters, alcohol. It's some similar fact patterns to college campuses. The only difference is that when you're in the military, you're subject to a criminal system that is so much more vast. If you show up late, that is technically, an orders violation, and you could be prosecuted in federal court for that. But most of what we see here is some of the same things that are being seen in Duval County courts: crimes against children, internet crimes. There's nothing there's nothing that prevents sailors from making everyday mistakes, just like everybody else. We have a lot less crimes as out of town, right? We weed out a lot of the bad eggs. It's very hard to get into the military, so that's one good thing. Is that typically, when you're defending a sailor accused of a crime at a court-martial, you don't have this long rap sheet like you deal with out of town. These are usually people that have tremendous records. Unique facets of military trials, exclusive versus concurrent jurisdiction. So if a crime happens on a ship, which a lot of them do, these ships go out with 5,000 people. If the federal government is taking, if it happens out in town, which is the more common fact pattern, especially here in Jacksonville, we could take it, the Navy could take it, or the state will take it. And sometimes I talk to prosecutors locally and I say, look, you're prosecuting this guy, we want good order and discipline too, so what we'll work out with them is we'll race to the courthouse. So if you guys can get them to the courthouse, we'll drop the case. If we can get them to the courthouse, you guys drop the case. It's technically not double jeopardy, because it's the federal government and the state government are, giving an 8th grade civics lesson here, but the optics of having two judiciary systems coming after one person aren't good, and it's kind of a waste of time and resources. The judge, prosecution, jury, and defense counsel, all military. So in a courtroom, it's just a sea of military. We also, sailors are afforded the right to hire civilian counsel. And there's a lot of situations where they should. If I'm being honest, I'm good friends with the prosecutors. These judges have an input on my advancement in the military. And so there are some cases where, the perception is like, this is all kind of working together, and this person is not going to fight for me. So there, that's one of the reasons why people will hire lawyers out in town. And there's so many good ones that will walk into military courts and do phenomenal jobs. But it does get awkward. As a defense lawyer, currently a defense lawyer, it does get awkward when some of your best friends, you're filing motions to dismiss a case against, and basically because of what they did or did not do. So that's one of the main reasons there. No bail. We don't have a bail system. You're not paying your way out of pretrial confinement. You're either in there for a good reason, or you're on pretrial restriction, so you can be ordered to basically stay in your house, right? That is just an order that the commanding officer will give you, and you have to follow it. And if you don't follow it, you're going to jail. You're going to pretrial confinement. Most of our sailors are just free until their trial, and then, you know, we'll see what happens there. Open discovery, very open discovery we have. And then I've never done a deposition in my entire career. So NCIS is very, in my opinion, forthcoming. They will talk to both sides. All the witnesses are supposed to talk to both sides. And there's a culture of that in the military, which I think is healthy. And then we have, we are governed by the military rules of evidence. So if you, one of the most famous parts of the movie, right, is like the Hollywood rules of evidence, where the defense lawyer asks if the colonel ordered the code red, and the judge says you don't have to answer that question. Like, you are allowed to ask that question in the military. You are allowed to, like, ask a witness if they forced your client to commit a crime. So basically the same rules as the federal rules of evidence. A couple other things about military trials that are unique that a lot of people don't realize. So I said that recently Congress has changed the way we've prosecuted certain crimes, and the reason why is, if you remember that slide where I showed the iceberg, it's because we created this system for good order and discipline, and we've given the authority to admirals and generals to make decisions about what happens in these cases. And so I guess one of the criticisms of that is, like, you have a pilot or a ship driver deciding what the outcome should be in a child molestation case. How are they qualified to do that? How are they qualified to negotiate on behalf of the federal government in a domestic violence case? So Congress recently changed that, and they've given that job to a lawyer, to the JAG Corps, and they've said basically lawyers are going to decide which cases, some of these more crimes against humanity go forward, and they're going to negotiate on behalf of the government. We're not going to have some pilot or, you know, some former aircraft carrier CO doing all of this. So we don't have unanimous verdicts. This is a topic that's going up before the Supreme Court right now. It's kind of controversial. We also don't have hung juries, so you either win or you lose, and that's it. And then sentencing hearing follows trial. So the way a court-martial will go is you select your jury on Monday, the government presents its evidence on Tuesday and Wednesday, the defense presents its evidence on Thursday if they have it. Usually they don't. We don't want to assume any burdens. There's a verdict Thursday, and then if the verdict comes in at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a Thursday, we go into sentencing at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Thursday. So one of the reasons for that is we've flown witnesses from all over the world. So to send them home and then bring them all back to decide a sentencing hearing months later would be super inefficient. I also just like that better than the way it's done out in town, just because you'll watch the news and they'll say, like, he was found guilty. His sentence is going to be like 5 months from now. And it just seems so anticlimactic. You know, I mean, as a defense lawyer, emotions are running high. I want to just get that I just want to get it all done. We all just move on. There's no recording devices in military courtrooms. So if you're ever following a military trial, this is what you're going to see in, like, publications. You're never going to see what you'll see in Duval County Court, which is like, you'll watch these there's live footage in the courtrooms. We don't do that. So those are some of the differentiating things about our system that I think are pretty unique. Just a side note, and this isn't that important, but this picture is taken from the Mayport courtroom, and the date here is April 17th, 2020. And the reason why that's an important date is because my experience going through COVID through the military justice system was probably very different than criminal lawyers and probably litigators out in town. I believe that we shut down our court system on March 13th of that year, and I was back in court litigating on behalf of the federal government just over a month later. And actually, you can see, this was like when, like, we weren't really sure which masks worked, and I think that, like, some, like, local organization of people that were into sewing just gave those to service members. But I did more litigating that year than any other year in my life because our courts were open. And what did I say? Bored sailors are bad sailors. I mean, it's just not good. And I'm sure a lot of people out in town have similar stories. You take people that are used to working around the clock, deploying, and you send them home with, you know, some of these troubled marriages, and they're drinking alcohol, and they're making very human mistakes. Our court system was flooded, so we were very busy that year. Okay, so I want to finish with a few things that I love about the JAG Corps, because I do love the JAG Corps. I have a lot of gripes, but it's that, you know, it's that love-hate relationship, and at the end of the day, I just love the Navy so much. I mean, I'm just so honored and so proud to be a part of it. I would say number 5 is the benefits. I mean, if for no other reason, right? I have the day off today. Like, the Navy is like already celebrating Christopher Columbus Day. So I have a 4-day weekend, which is like the bomb. I mean, it's so cool. I get a GI Bill. I actually get to give that to my kids because I have no interest in going back to school. The healthcare benefits are top notch. It's free healthcare. I mean, and it's pretty good. The pay is pretty good. I don't want to say that too loud unless, like, you know, a decision maker on our salaries is like listening in one day. Like, well, it's a pretty good life. If you live within your means, the military is a pretty good life. I believe that we practice meaningful law. We take meaningful cases. These are a couple of the cases that I took. I was in Groton, Connecticut earlier this week litigating a death case. The Navy has its own fentanyl and opioid crisis. And so we, like many other systems, are grappling with how to treat mental health, how to properly deal with pain management without addiction on the back end of that. USS Fitzgerald, when ships crash, they're going to hold people accountable, and that's just kind of the nature of our system. So these are important cases. In this particular case, I believe the commanding officer was on the ship for like 3 weeks. He was asleep, and the ship crashed, and 7 sailors died, and the government charged him with negligent homicide. So these are high stakes. The camaraderie is really good. I mean, I really believe that, you know, it's a diverse, and they're super smart. And one of the things I love about the JAG Corps is, like, nobody cares where you went to law school, Harvard, whatever. We make fun of the Ivy Leaguers out of our own sense of insecurity, if anything. You know, like that's like the great equalizers. We're all wearing the uniform now. So where you came from and what you did, whether you were practicing law before, it's over. It's what are you doing for the Navy now? It's also, you know, the culture is very, you know, when you're overseas, you spend Christmas together. You go through, divorces with these people. You're stuck on we're literally stuck on an island with them. So you get to know them in a way that a lot of people, I think, at a law firm and in another practice probably wouldn't. It's such an adventure. The Navy is such an adventure. I picked this. I could have picked any picture. I picked this picture for a reason because our family, as you can tell, very white. Very blonde hair, very blue-eyed, and when we walk through Asia, we just stick out like a sore thumb. And everybody, it's really neat, everybody wants to take a picture with our family because they think it's the funniest thing in the world. And so I have one rule when families and people want to take a picture with our oddball family, and that is, if you're taking a picture of us, I'm getting a picture with you. So here we are in Korea. Somebody wanted a picture with us. I said, hey, I'm going to get a picture with you. I've been to all throughout the Middle East, Asia, so many places I never imagined I'd go. It's a really fun experience. And then lastly, is that I get to wear the uniform. I'm in the military, and that's a source of tremendous pride. This is right after deployment. That's my daughter. She didn't say a word to me the entire deployment. She was pissed when I left. And I walked off the ship, and she came right up and gave me a big hug, and they put it in the news. And those are the kinds of things that are just a source of pride. It's just how meaningful some of this work is. So I do appreciate the opportunity to present. I mean, I love talking about the Navy, and Doug, I mean, when I told my dad that, I really wanted to start networking, your name was in this luncheon was one of the first ones that popped up. And so to be here a year later presenting it's very, very important to me and very meaningful to me. So thank you so much for this time.
Well, thank you. This is utterly fantastic. What most of these facts I didn't know, and all of them.
Just don't fact check.
Okay. So you're saying in a jury trial that it's not, doesn't have to be unanimous. Is it just a matter of majority rule?
No, it's 3/4. So, and that's it's interesting that you bring that up, because they are talking about changing that, because that can bring up some very bizarre results. If I could give an example, I was prosecuting a child sex crime. The evidence was very circumstantial. We didn't have the best case, but we're the federal government, we got lots of money, so they said go ahead and prosecute it. I felt like it was an important case to prosecute. We prosecuted it, and they found him guilty. But then the next day, they gave him no jail time. And so that told me that it wasn't a unanimous verdict. Somebody felt very strongly that it shouldn't have been a guilty verdict. And then when they went to sentencing the next day, whoever that was probably carried the conversation and said, I'm not letting you sentence beyond. So you see, what happens in jury deliberation rooms is the source of, I think, at least if you're a lawyer, but like human fascination. We'll hear them just screaming. And military members are very smart. They follow the rules. I mean, when the judge says you cannot use somebody's silence against them, they don't. I mean, you hear it all the time. I walked out of a courtroom, this woman walks up to me, and I said, because we like to get feedback, I said, what'd you think? And she said, your client was not guilty, but he ain't innocent. And I said, you know what, that means our system's working. But, so yes, it's a 3/4 for both. 3/4 for the verdict, 3/4 for the sentence. You start at 0, no punishment, just a conviction, and then you start tacking on from there. Bad conduct or dishonorable discharge, jail time. So a lot of times, and we have no sentencing guidelines. So I've had a case where the government was asking for a life sentence, and the defense asked for no further punishment. And juries are just like, what do we do with this? And these are like ship drivers and engineers, so they're not. It's interesting to hear how they resolve these issues. But Congress is changing that. We've come up with some sentencing guidelines. Soon sentencing will go to the judge. But the unanimous verdict thing is an issue that we raise. I raise in every trial now, because if the Supreme Court says we need unanimous verdicts, I want that on the record, that I asked for a unanimous verdict in case it goes south at trial.
Reverse, right?
So,
did the Few Good Men jury get it right? Because I think they said dishonorable discharge, but no time.
So they found, so yes, the jury got it right, Hollywood got it wrong. They were convicted, so they were found not guilty of murder, but guilty of conduct on becoming a Marine. That is not a real thing. Conduct on becoming an officer and a gentleman, they've actually recently gotten rid of that gentleman language. But since they weren't officers, they should have just been let go without any kind of dismissal whatsoever. So I think the jury, I think the jury had to find that in light of the evidence, but Hollywood definitely led them astray. Okay. I blame Aaron Sorkin.
For the juries, is it just random, or do you get a notice, or do commanding officer picks the
So
jury?
that's another fascinating part about our system is that this admiral or the general convening the trial. So like picture Jack Nicholson.
Yeah.
He gets to pick who the jury is, like among his pool of service members. So the optics of that are not good because if you're the defense, right, like you start seeing like the conspiracy in every single member, right? If I have like a crime against a 13-year-old and all the jurors have like some 13-year-old daughter, I'm like, hey, what is the admiral up to, man? This isn't cool. In reality, at least in my experience, typically what they do is they just take the people that have not as much to do and they send them to these trials. So you have a lot of dentists, people that are on shore duty, people that are just being stashed somewhere. You're not going to have the commanding officer of a ship walk into a jury pool typically, but sometimes we do. And another interesting facet of our juries is they are instructed that rank means absolutely nothing, and they take that pretty seriously. So you can have a very junior sailor and a Navy captain, commander of a big ship back there, and rank is in theory means nothing, and I think in practice it really does. I think it really does mean nothing.
Wow. Well, there we are at the end of the meeting. Fabulous. Thank you.